Vielen Dank, guten Tag, and good afternoon. I'm really sorry for switching on into English language, but I do much hope that it will not be a problem. I would like to start first of all with thanks to the organizers, and since not a usual formal thanks, which sometimes follows, but that's really that's an important point which really made me inspired when I knew about this project, because I absolutely understand this, the issue of recognition of such places in Eisenhüttenstadt and many other of the same period is a very complicated issue. It's a really long and in some sense controversial way, but I'm absolutely sure, I've been involved in different initiatives in different countries, that any successful step which can be made here in Germany and maybe directly here in Eisenhüttenstadt could have a really great impact on the same projects or very small, maybe local initiatives in other places. And in this sense, I can imagine just the faces of people whom I know from Ukraine, from, I don't know, Lithuania and Russia, who would maybe one day understand that, well, there was a really great solution here in Germany. I guess it would make a real contribution to the process in general. So that's my real pleasure of being here with a small contribution to the project. My talk will be devoted mostly to two main points. The first question is mostly historical one, but I see my aim just to put the talk on Eisenhüttenstadt into a general context, to more broad historical context and evolution of socialist cities, trying to make a linkage between post-war social cities, like here, what we see just here now, and interwar period, which still remains a little bit mysterious in terms of historical research of those of the Soviet Union. And the second point, which is mostly critical, and here I guess there will be a sort of a line with the previous speakers, just to understand what's actually happening today with such places in terms of the symbols. Why suddenly we're all speaking about the same things in so much different local contexts, and what actually is it is about. So the main thing that, and perhaps this is one of the most important points concerning socialist cities, that they started as a completely speculative and completely theoretical phenomenon. Let's say the idea of socialist cities was born not in a building platform, not on the construction platform, not in the field. It was born in the cabinets, in the desks. And this huge discussion, which I absolutely sure well known to all the white audience concerning, for instance, the Nikolai Milutin Sotsgorod and Sapsovich, which made an inspiration for the generations of architects, they started as an academic discussion. But the paradox of the Soviet life, like in many other spheres, paradoxes of the Soviet life, that it launched a really large scale and probably most massive, most ambitious urban planning projects ever existed. This is a map of 1937, quite difficult period for the country, which normally outlines the scale of the project. Because here I put only those new, let's say, planned cities or socialist cities which were started to be built in different parts of the country and which are mostly popular. This is a not exhaustive list I'm just pointing here. But the main idea and the main ambition was not just to put different kind of socialist cities and give origin to new towns in different parts of the country. Because the idea of creating the planned cities actually became the idea to create, let's say, a planned country. Because in every region, especially in Ukraine, in Siberia, in the Far East, in Kazakhstan, and on the border between the Siberia and Urals, there was the idea to create a sort of a productive platform, industrial hub. And the main point was so much important because it was completely out of any connection with the reality. The evolution of socialist cities and general transformation of planned cities, and probably that's one of the clues for the issue, can be traced in two dimensions. It can be traced from two different completely perspectives, between which we can sometimes find the gap. The first dimension, it is well known for all of us. This is a public discourse of socialist cities, huge discussion between the architects. Those papers became the source of inspiration also for the architects who designed and planned Eisenhüttenstadt, who planned Nova Huta and many other places in the post-war period. They were really wide, they were intense, they were involved in many different spheres, not just an architectural professional community, people who were involved in conversation about the new socialist human nature and so on and so on. But with one interesting view, all those architects who were involved in the process, who were just very deeply in this attempts to understand what is the reality of the new socialist city, they were sometimes missing the border between what was real and what was fantasy. This is an exception from the official state of Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia is one of the huge socialist cities, planned cities in Ukraine, which was built near a hydroelectric station on the Dnipro River. We also have already saw the map of the same region in the talk of Barbara Anna Bensmeyer. I draw your attention. This is a piece and fragment which was written by professional urban planner, the person who was responsible for the construction process. We're entering the city. It doesn't look like Moscow, it doesn't look like New York, it looks like a park, and so on, so on. You can read it on the screen. And after that, he's imagining and envisioning the city which will come up mostly in 30, 35 years. Pavel Haustov, the name of the architect, was absolutely right. So the city didn't look like New York, it didn't even look like Moscow, because it looked like this. And these are the best pictures of the Zaporizhia in 1930. Because normally Zaporizhia in 1930 and 1932, which is described as a flourishing, widening city, looked like a grass of 20-25 houses at maximum, and all the rest was a barracks. That was a typical story. Of course, we can say that was a sort of a propaganda which was promoted by Soviet authority, but it would be really oversimplifying to say that, because it was a special style of thinking when all those professionals, and it is testified by many memoirs, by the books, by those people who really left, the written sources about that, that was a special style of convincing themselves that the new urban reality is born in here. And what we are doing is not just making and construction, we are just putting in the people's mind some idea of a new perfect model urban space. The paradox of the situation, is that despite all those debates on the new socialist reality, on the reality of planned cities, was that in reality, in actual urban policy, the urban issues was at the very background. Because the main priority for all Soviet authorities and local authorities in different republics was to fulfill and to implement industrial project. The factory, which could provide mobilization, resources for military, and so on. And the urban issue, which was so much widespread, which you can imagine that there was at least 15 professional journals which appeared for a short period of 5 years, and which normally shaped the general public discourse of the problem. Despite all that, the urban issues was of a secondary importance, let's say even residual phenomena. There is a good and very sad joke, as usual in the Soviet Union and Russia, about the work of architects, because they say that Soviet architects in the 30s had really enough freedom. They had enough freedom from financial resources, and they had the freedom from any clear instructions. So they needed to be improvised. They needed to invent something new in order to solve unsolvable problems in general. And that is a fragment from the memoirs of Ernst May, which had some special priority moral right to be much more straightforward, because everybody was thinking in this way. But normally he is speaking that we are working with a lack and with an absence of any clear orientations, any clear instructions, any clear guidelines. we are constructing the cities, the planned cities, without a plan, let's say. And all the story of socialist cities of interwar period is the same story. This is a Magnitogorsk, well known, the best known for the wide international audience due to brilliant research and due to, of course, the public discourse, due to the discussions in the 30s. And the story of the city, which sometimes is put, like in Wikipedia, as an example of a planned city, is that the plan was changing 3 or 4 times within 3 years, and finally was moved from one band conservator to another band conservator. In all the other terms, it is a planned city. But the main story is that this process was very similar in different parts of the country. For instance, this is another case, extremely interesting, really overlooked. Today this city is called Nizhny Novgorod. In the Soviet time it was Gorky. That was a headquarter for building the hugest automobile plant in the whole Soviet Union, with a strong contribution of engineers from the United States. Of course, that was concealed, but because it was the United States for the Soviet Union, but still, that was a mixture of different styles and mixture of, and ambition of the Soviet authorities. Just if to look at official documents, we can find that in 3 years, I would say just in a 2.5 years, if to be correct, there were 4 official master plans of the planned cities. When the process had already been implemented and launched, according to the memoirs of the chief architect, he said that normally we are not sure whether this project we have already started will be continued next. The example which is especially familiar to me, another case, Uralmash, heavy machine plant, building plant on the very border of Urals and Asia, which was aimed to create a linkage between Siberia and all the western part of the country for all industrial lines and for all transport lines. In the classical Soviet textbooks, even in the 1960s, despite the rejection of functionalism, it was put like an example of a pure integral plan which followed as a building process of the city according to integral clear plan and example of the metaphor of the Soviet urban planning with all its Soviet urban planning in the interwar period with all its advantages and disadvantages. The idea was very simple, just to make the integral space from the industrial part of the city and from the residential part. Of course, it's a common problem for all planned cities, but here they were put just so much closer to each other that according to the idea of the architect, the people who were coming, who might have come to the city, shouldn't feel this difference, whether the working space and whether the space for the rest. So there was a beams of the streets which was just put inside the entry of the social, of the industrial part of the factory itself. But again, the irony of the situation is that it was very sudden, very unexpected, and only one solution which allowed the local architects and urban planners to solve the problem of making a master plan within 1 month. That is also testified according to the documents. Best proof of all the situation, of this spontaneous, hectic, really, I would say haphazard, really unexpected development of planned socialist cities, is that it's a challenge for the heritage preservation specialists, well known for them. It's very difficult in most of these cases to find the building architectural complex with a clear attribution to the concrete author. That's not a point that there was a collective authors. Of course, in many cases we can find that there was just, I mean, the head of the office, and it's just quite difficult to understand who made a contribution in what part and so on. The case is different. Most of complexes, at least, well, enough number of complexes, was reconstructed within 10 years due to unexpected decisions. For instance, this is a Uralmash again. This is a very symbolical meaning, I would say a bit later. It was started to be built as a factory kitchen or the fabric kitchen, like a huge canteen for the Soviet style. But then suddenly, new authorities of the plant decided, new management of the plant decided that we have a lack of the space for the rest, for residential and for some leisure time, let's make it as a huge complex of palace of culture. They made a palace of culture, and after that, in order to linkage both parts, they made one of the most prominent and interesting classical, neoclassical Stalinist style, let's say, halls in front of that. This building had a really complicated fate. At the moment, it is listed, it is recognized. But the main sense, it's my pleasure to say it here in Eisenhüttenstadt and in Germany in general, that the launch for the discussion was made around 12 years ago with a project which was held in this monument. That was a venue for the Bauhaus and murals. The project which made a great impact for the whole region in terms of the public discussions in the field. And this is a story which is typical for most of the regions. We can't, of course, we know the name of Bela Scheffler, who was a graduate from the Bauhaus school, but nobody knows still now, having all testifies in archives, what was exactly his contribution. That was a mixture, that was a chaotic development, that was the real nature of the planned cities. But of course, here it's much more important to understand what was the linkage with the post-war period. Because, of course, for those people who were organizing and new socialist ideological projects all over the Eastern Europe, in Hungary, in Poland, in DDR, in Czech Republic, so-called Soviet friendship was a basis, and Soviet cooperation with Soviet architects was one of the inspirations for organizing the cities and organizing the urban space. And of course, all those plans, which I just mentioned, they were also used as a testing ground for the new construction process. But there were very important distinctions. Because in most cases, the cities which were built in these mentioned Eastern European countries were of a smaller size. Those cities were just mostly planned for 25, 30, 35 inhabitants with 1, 2, 3 important exceptions or exclusions, which normally just have a proof for the general rule. But of course, it put aside and set aside the most challenges for the urban planning process. That's the main point. The second point is that despite the reality of the interwar period, the architects with advantage more or less had a clear platform, had a clear framework for the architecture process. That was a socialist realism. If we took all the examples of these socialist cities in Ukraine, in Belarus, in the Soviet Russia, and so on, there was a variety of functional ideas which normally wasn't generalized, it wasn't systematized. Here there was a platform, and there was a background, which of course was changing. We know it very well, even just to look at the history, a general evolution of Eisenhüttenstadt. And of course, the point which is extremely overlooked at the moment is a role of regional traditions, local traditions of architects, which already, for instance, in the Czech Republic, where the functionalism still was ongoing, and those people who were involved in the process of Sotis were continuing to work in the post-war period. But despite that, and that is my point, that my challenge, even despite all these complexities and challenges, even those cities were facing a serious troubles and serious challenges due to the whole period. Dimitrovgrad, one of the first, normally probably the largest socialist city, which was officially announced to be built in the post-war period in Bulgaria as a landmark, as a model city, let's say, for the socialist period. Even if we look at the history of this local case, there will be numerous changes of projects. There will be a lack of the housing stock for those people, for the workers who were invited to work there. There was also a serious problem of the priority of the industrial construction, as all researchers who are involved in archives today just putting a special emphasis on that. There was something about the byproduct. The socialist city was becoming a sort of a byproduct, what was left from the resources from the industry and so on. If we look at the Nova Huta, which seems to be an exception, we can find very important thing. The larger was the project, the more challenges we can see there, the more unexpected, haphazard, the more hectic things and symptoms of the urban process can be found. I'm just having the lack of time, just put most evident example, well known, that's just even within the 50s, even the 15 years, the mixture of style, including so-called Swedish bloc and French bloc, were also an unavoidable measure to feel the integrity of the urban space. And by the way, which is also mentioned by everyone who was involved in Nova Huta building process, there was no any established approved plan of the city at the moment when it was officially announced the city is already existing. That was also a normal scene. And Dunau Schwarz with the same, not going just into details with the scales, just some figures which are also make this tendency absolutely evident. Urban planners didn't expect to have such number of inhabitants, the rise of them within the very short period. Still, the Dunau Schwarz is considered to be one of the model cities. But the question we should just put at the moment while looking out of the window and just being here in the audience, what actually making the main interest, the main attention to the problem of the socialist urban legacy at the moment, and concretely to the socialist cities like Eisenhüttenstadt? I would say that in cases of planned socialist cities, not in social legacy in general, there can be two main important processes. One process is evident. This is a process which really we together manifest itself. This is a narrative of the general tendency of rethinking and reevaluating the heritage of the 20th century. What is a socialist modernism? This is also part of the modern, a little bit different. It's Ostmoderne, but as we are finding a new word for Ostmoderne, we understand that it's keeping a line with the general narrative. Let's rethink, let's reevaluate, let's find new meanings, new senses. This is a huge amount of exhibitions, like in New York, prominent exhibition 2 years ago in the Museum of Contemporary Art in New York devoted to the Yugoslavia. Some traits of fashion and trendy scenes to work with this, with the use, with these new symbols and so on. And also here I'm keeping in line with the previous talkers, but certainly it would be not enough to explain what is happening in those places right today and what is going to be happen if to exclude the second highly important tendency, which also unfortunately mostly overlooked. This is an exception, a small fragment from the huge project, which was, by the way, initiated by the contemporary artists around 12, 13 years ago, from Nizhny Novgorod, from Uralmash, and also the places from St. Petersburg, which was devoted to so-called art research of the new urban spaces. Young artists were coming for unfamiliar, completely unfamiliar places for them, and they were just trying to represent them in a manner which would be understandable and comprehensible for the wide audience. I'm not going just to repeat that, but the key phrase here is probably you're going to explore this place that doesn't exist, but whose shadows and echoes you will probably manage to find. That was a new discourse which combined a sort of an artistic view on the subject and some nostalgic view. I would say that the term nostalgia is the key here, but it's not nostalgia in a classical terms. It's not nostalgia about, of course, about the Soviet times and Soviet generation. No, because main subject of those people who were involved in the project were young people of 20 years, of 25 years, 30, 35, and so on. That was a special feeling of the time and attempt to contemplate, to wonder, to envision a reality which probably really never existed. But in the lack of other sources of inspiration, and it is especially acute for the post-Soviet countries, not maybe so much for the Eastern Europe in general, but still, but mostly for the post-Soviet countries, where there was an attempt to speak about this project as a utopian project in terms of the future that might have been, to speak about the future that never happened. That was a sort of a maybe charm, maybe mystery, but it was very workable, really targeted and really straightforward way of narrative, which normally created, let's say, a narrative we can call it like utopian narrative, maybe unrealized utopia, which covered very different places. To speak about not so much about the styles, not so much about architecture itself, but some meaning, symbols, and so on. When you're coming to a place like Uralmarsh, like Eisenhüttenstadt, you know nothing about that. You know, you don't know any names about the architects, but you understand that there was some great idea which was infilled in this place. It gives you some meaning, it gives you some inspiration. And making interviews with people of different professions in different, I mean, young and not so young in different places, I found that that was the main motivation. It's not only about the architects, not about the designers, about historians, about ecologists, about the social activists, and so on. But important story is that even if we go beyond the post-Soviet space and look to Nova Huta, I would say, and this is, not only my distant eye on the problem, but most successful projects which promoted Nova Huta as an example of working with urban legacy, this is a project which has a little to do with an architecture. This is a project which uses architecture as a metaphor of, let's say, again, experiencing and contemplating about the time, about the past. Not regret about the socialist past, for sure, that's impossible, but that's some kind of special touch which you feel with this space. It's not like, in the cases of other modernist architecture, of socialist architecture in general, but the memoirs, perfect project, great project of Nova Huta RTF as a collection of the memoirs of those people who were living there, of their grandparents, that they made a story. So they made that narrative. And Unfinished Utopia, the book which, at least for many researchers, for many activists, became a sort of a landmark also in terms of this style of not so much of the content, but the style of speaking about that. But of course, the process, and I'm coming to an end, what actually we have right now. I just give one case. Again, this is a Parisian, this is Ukraine, and this is a great result, which can be considered as a great result of all social activists in the field. After 10 years of very insistent, very consistent work, they succeeded in putting the so-called socialist city, the territory of the socialist city, which at the very central part of the huge Zaporizhia, in the guidebooks. It was a sort of a recognition that, well, this is a global commons. This is something that is shared by by authorities, by the way, in Ukraine, and that was a prominent thing. And it seems to be really good, yeah, because on the one hand, we're looking at the public debates and we're understanding that the seminars like this could have a clear outcome. We can at least not just even to renovate buildings like in Zaporizhia or in Nizhny Novgorod, but we can make it we can make some promotion, we can raise awareness about these places. But there is another question which is a bit provocative. And what was this project in general? The project of socialist city normally has never been implemented, and nobody knows still to what extent what is implemented. And there are at least three different, it's not only three, just of different, again, expected plans for the city, which was found in archives by our colleagues in the last decade. And it is still unclear to what extent these boundaries of this place really fit and match to initial idea. But at the same time, many people, I wouldn't overestimate those people who are interested in the issue, who are coming to Zaporizhia, they're of course following these lines. Is it an imaginary space? Maybe yes. On the one hand, it finds a strange solution. On the one hand, we're creating some ideal vision of the space which probably never existed. On the other hand, maybe that's only one story and one possible clue, especially in problematic, let's say, to be honest, countries like Ukraine, like Russia, like Belarus, to draw some attention on the places. But on the other hand, it keeps a perfect line with the origin of the concept. If it appeared like a speculative thing, maybe it should also live in a sort of a public discourse only. And maybe that will be the main clue, the main impulse for launching the discussion. Maybe for such cities as Nizhny Novgorod, as Magnitogorsk, as Novokuznetsk, as Gomel, and many others on the post-Soviet space, that will be at least an intermediate step towards the recognition, public recognition, if not official, for the monuments. And of course, the social engagement, the social activities which really arise during the last few years, they are in many ways outstanding for that. For many people, especially for young people, this is again venue of the Uralmarsh, which I already mentioned, and this is a Beatles festival, which is organized. I'm coming to the very end, which is organized at the very core. Like imagine, for instance, the place here just in front of the theater. And of course, the art. Here, I would like to make special attention to the very final point. This is a central square of the Uralmarsh. And this is a project by the young calligraphist, contemporary artist Pokras Lampas, who realized just to find a convenient place, a huge place. This is a place of the socialist city which is bigger of any other square in the whole region, to create a so-called suprematistic Malevich Christ. But the fate of this Christ is purely post-Soviet fate, because it was removed 1 week after the protest of local Orthodox society, who said that we are not going to go by foot on the Christ. Still, that was a case which really made the Uralmarsh on a public agenda of the whole large scale. All of us can find many examples of that, but I guess maybe this game with images, game with public discourses is not so much speculated, fantastic. Maybe it could have a really pragmatic outcome. Thank you so much for your attention.